Hey everybody, Mike McWilliams, Upstairs to the Right Music Channel. Thank you so much for being with me this evening and for me to get my mic turned on. Sure, let me get it adjusted here. How's everybody doing out there? So good to be here on the Wednesday Night Hump, the Upstairs to the Right Music Channel podcast. We do this every Sunday and Wednesday, 11 p.m. Central European time, same bat channel. So glad that you guys always tune into this podcast. It's always really, really greatly appreciated. Good to see Maddie here. Good to see Scott here as always. Mr. Watson, good to see you here. Good to have you guys. Good to be here on a Wednesday evening. Um, let's see what's been going on. While we wait for more people to show up here in the live stream, I will talk about things that occurred with me. I had the pleasure. I don't know if you guys have seen my post on my channel yet, but page. But I had the pleasure of going to the Black Light White Noise Adrian Smith and Richie Kotzen tour, their Harlem leg of their tour last night. Um, Patrick from Patrick's Guitars was kind enough to reach out to me and extend the chance to go to that concert with them, and I'm glad I did. Um, it reminded me of my LA days, the LA Roxy days. It really had that sound to it, and you know, it really was quite a good rock show. I have to say, he had Richie Kotzen had his wife Linda, who I believe used to play with Vixen. I believe Patrick was telling me, and I seem to recall myself. Yes, she was the bass player for Vixen. She was playing a Fender jazz bass, and it sounded great. She sounded great. That's the bass that I use on all of my recordings, all of every recording that I've ever done. And honestly speaking, her playing sound through an Ampeg head. She was playing through sounded great. The opening act, one thing that I did notice was that the opening act was playing through modelers. And this was my first time having the opportunity to hear a band play live on a stage, and a nice stage as well as at that. It's a really nice venue. And they usually have philharmonic music there. So it was interesting. Um, and I noticed sitting there, and I had a great seat, thanks to Patrick, fifth row from the stage. And I was able to really notice that the sound of that band playing through those modelers, I don't know exactly which, I tried to strain my head to take a look to see what they were playing through, but it had no mids to it. A lot of lows, a lot of highs, but the sound was absolutely no mids to it at all. And I turned to Patrick and I said that. It's funny, we were both wearing earplugs. I had on, of course, my Loop concert earplugs, and he was wearing a set that he had custom made. Actually, he was telling me, and everybody else around me, I noticed had earplugs too, as a kind of side thing. That was kind of funny to me. I was like, I've never been to a concert. Even the cats in front of me, they were a bit younger, and he was wearing earplugs as well. So must be a new thing because we didn't have that back. I told you guys I used to use candle wax and tissue paper in my ears in the studios. Um, so no lows, and then of course when Adrian Smith and Richie Kotzen came out on stage, they were playing through Marshall. Both of them had two Marshall four by 12, so they had 8x12s each. Richie was playing through look like a vintage head, and Adrian Smith was playing through what looked like to be a Marshall 900 head. So, and then of course the Ampeg bass amp that Linda was playing through. So, quite honestly speaking, the sound was full. You're just not, you're not going to convince me. Yeah, it sounds okay, but it doesn't have the fullness of, the mids were definitely there when they came on. And I just noticed that. So I thought I would share that with you guys. It was just an observation. And it was a pretty cool one at that, because I really got the opportunity to. Hey, Patrick's here. Hey, Patrick, how you doing? Hey, man, thank you so much for inviting me to that show last night. I really got a lot out of it. I a great deal out of it, and it was a great pleasure to be there, man. Mr. Muter in the house, how you doing? Let me say hello to everybody. Mr. Watson, I said, oh, Ben, how you doing? Welcome, welcome, guys. Yeah, I noticed that. Now, it really was from my ears. Call them what you will, but it was definitely a difference between a modeled, controlled stage sound, and of course, the old-fashioned way of just playing through amps. Different tone, and really reminded me of my LA days. So it was great. I really had a good time, and thank you, Patrick, for inviting me. That was just a good musical education, something that I need every now and then. Because then of course my producer hat comes on, and I sit there and I'm watching. I'm like, well, that's interesting. I would have done that, or I know where that's going, or just a lot of different things to sit there and experience. So it was great. It was fun, Mike. Oh, Julia, not Linda. Sorry, Julia. Linda played a precision though, not jazz bass. Are you sure? That looked like a jazz bass to me. I was looking at the pickups of that. I have to take a look at the photo on that. Well, either way, it beat the hell out of that six-string bass that the the opening act bass player was playing through that modeler. I have to tell you, precision P bass or jazz bass, either way, um, uh, Julie, Julie, Julia, Julia, not Linda, Julia was excellent. Sounded great, just a full sound, and you're just not going to get that. I'm not convinced with modelers. That concert, I walked away, and I'm not sold on the whole modeler thing. To be honest with you, I still think that amps sound better, but maybe that's just me. Saw Diesel Zappa once with Axe Effects and wasn't impressed. Yeah, yeah. Again, it's a clean sound, but it's got the lows, it's got the highs, but it really was lacking in the mids, and it really stood out to me. It was night and day difference. So there is that. Um, Recently, Jimmy Iovine made a statement that I read. Jimmy Iovine is a very famous record executive producer, the co-founder of the Beats by Dre brand. Uh, Really a pretty in there kind of guy. So when he says things, I'm going to read what he has to say, because generally these guys signal things a little bit ahead of the next steps. And so with this channel and with these podcasts, I dig a little deeper. And I read this article, and I'll read the first couple of paragraphs. Jimmy Iovine believes music streaming services are minutes away from being obsolete, seemingly due to a disconnect regarding the wants and the needs of today's artists. I appreciate the fact that Jimmy Iovine is taking a focused, uh, an artist-heavy focus. I, I, I would hope that an old, school record guy like him would have that kind of a viewpoint. Um, but Jimmy Iovine isn't saying people will stop streaming. He's saying that the current streaming platform have reached its usefulness, and that's a very important distinction. And when people hear that streaming is over, they assume that there's going to be a behavior change that comes with that. And as I've been pointing out in a few discussions that we've had here on these podcasts, is that once a behavior within culture has changed, it's very, very, very hard for that to go back. Um, you know, people aren't suddenly deleting Spotify, although I'll get into their numbers here in a minute. You'll see that they're not exactly signing up in droves either. Um, Neither are they going back to CDs or Discman players, unfortunately. But what's changing is whether or not we continue with the Spotify system. And they recently reported that they paid out something in the neighborhood of $11 billion last year. And that sounds like a lot of money until you really start digging into the figures. And that money, quite frankly, after me taking a look into it, is really super hyper concentrated. Um, in other words, it only goes to the top 1% of the earners on Spotify. So you got 99% of the artists on Spotify basically supporting the top 1%. Revenue is flat, as I was indicating that people are not signing up to Spotify. They're certainly not signing up to any of the premium packages or any of the increased rate packages that have come out recently. So therefore, growth really has stalled, and the system only survives if it keeps scaling forever. And that's just not a healthy ecosystem. The reason iTunes music failed is because they were on a simple scaling system like this, um, that ended up not being so great. Simple, but not so great. And this really proves the point that streaming platforms are really designed like utilities. Um, it's a treadmill. Artists really aren't an important part of that kind of environment. And being designed like a utility, utilities really don't care who you are. Your phone company or your power company, your water company, they don't care really who you are, and until you stop paying your bills. And um, when you have an ecosystem where people really don't care who you are, it's not good for the artists, obviously, because artists really survive on people's caring deeply. When I sat there in that concert last night, the opening act, you know, they didn't draw huge numbers of people in the room, but the minute that the headliner came in, that place was packed. And I saw that as being a support system that Adrian and Richie over the decades were able to build up. I don't think that a younger, newer artist is going to have such an easy time building up a fan base of caring fans that support you throughout your career. Um, and this ecosystem really further makes it difficult for any artist, really, to survive. You know, a utility and caring, these two ideas fundamentally don't jibe with each other. And they're just incompatible with each other, excuse me, incompatible with each other. And that's why streaming didn't fail, as tonight's title suggests, it finished. And I want to talk about what that means tonight in this podcast. And actually, point out to you that, again, we're in flux right now. And even things that seem like a sure bet, like Spotify right now, may not be a sure bet coming down the pike here very shortly, surprisingly, very shortly. Talk about that. Check here in the chat and see what's being said. Hod420 says worthless. Thank you. I appreciate that vote of confidence. She used a DiMarzio pickup, a Billy Sheehan model. Nice. Yeah, really, just really sounded great. Jimmy from Ioscope. Yep, that's who I'm talking about tonight. He is wrong, unfortunately. Jimmy should know he's got a 25-year younger wife who is a model. Only you, Hans, would point that out. Yeah, well, guys like that in that position, the women are merely it's like the handbag is to the woman is the handbag to the man in that situation. It's just how it is. And having the younger trophy wife is what those guys get off on for whatever reason. Well, I know the reason. I just say that the only thing I see in the future of that is a bad back and an empty wallet. So every man to his own. But Jimmy was pointing out an uncomfortable truth that streaming worked perfectly. It solved privacy. We all know the days of piracy. It standardized access. So it made a pretty, straight ahead portal in order to get access to. It normalized subscriptions. By the way, I'm not saying any of these things like positives. These are all the negative things, but it worked. These are the things that it was meant to do. These were not to an advantage to us. Okay. It really solidified streaming and it normalized subscriptions. It really helped normalize the subscription model and not just music, but in a lot of things. And it trained an entire generation to expect all music everywhere instantly. Again, I come from a generation where you had to get in your car or get on the bus or do whatever you had to do to get down to the record store on the day of release of your favorite artist's album. And sometimes you stood in line to get one, and sometimes you didn't, but you were there and you bought it and you support it. And again, this support system is built into the culture of music where the artists know that, if they got you like that, unless they really screw up, to become like an axe murderer or something, that they're always going to have that support. And again, training a whole generation to do the opposite of that really is a bad thing. And that was the goal, by the way. Streaming was never designed to create careers, it wasn't, or really to help support careers. Fundamentally, it's just a portal to distribute files in the most efficient manner possible. And once distribution becomes frictionless like that, music stops becoming the product. That's my point of this. That the artists at this point no longer are part of that equation of any kind of real significance. And that's an odd thing to say. But attention becomes the product. Jimmy Iovine later goes on to say in that article that, where is that? Platforms like TikTok and Instagram appear to be fulfilling the needs of artists. Iovine suspects streaming services could be on the brink of being phased out. But that's what TikTok does. He says that's what Instagram does. You can somewhat promote yourself. So the streaming services to me are minutes away from being obsolete because of that. You know, and I think what he's trying to allude to again is that system, that old system of support. And once you build up an audience, they showed up. It's like, Field of Dreams. you know, if you build it, they shall come. And playlists began to matter more than artists. And then producers began to get the notes from the higher ups that songs need to be optimized for the first 30 seconds. I think they were being generous because most people's attention span is about 5 seconds. But they kind of figured out that within that first 30 seconds, you're going to grab somebody and get them to listen to the rest of the song or not. This is nothing new. Um, Jimmy Jam, James Harris the third. I'm not going to call these guys by their stage name anymore because we're too old. James Harris the third said that he constantly thought about that first, you know, 15, 30 seconds of a song. So it's not something new, but what it's done in the context of this not so open market, it's made everybody sound vaguely similar like everyone else. And this system, in another way, in that regard, was rewarding retention, not expression. It could be vapid crap. But if you got past that first 30 seconds, you got rewarded for that. So people began to say to themselves, well, why am I going to put all this effort into this beautiful music with this, meaningful thoughts and beautiful production behind it if something, that's got some outrageously gross or stupid lyrics in the first 30 seconds is going to grab attention over that. So what I think Iovine is trying to say is that the system has extracted everything that it can from music. It bled it dry. It bled it dry. There's nothing left to squeeze. Squeezed out the real creatives, squeezed out all the things that supported those creatives, squeezed out any kind of personal connection between the artist and their fans, and just bled it dry. Bled it dry. Absolutely bled it dry. Maddie says Spotify have nearly 300 million paid subs. The only thing that will knock them down is massive upswing towards AI music providers. Yeah, but again, their numbers are stagnating. Their growth is stagnating, and their system is built on a scaling. In other words, when I say they squeezed everything I can, they've scaled as far as I think the scaling is going to occur. And now we're seeing a drop off. We saw it with Apple, iTunes. Again, people said the same thing about iTunes. Oh, it's not going anywhere. It's gone. It's not really a big player. It's still kind of there, I think, but it's not a major player. And that shall be the future of Spotify. They cannot continue this scaling process. It just doesn't work, especially when there's nothing left to squeeze. Especially when independent artists such as myself have said, hey, you know what? I'm not going to put my new album on Spotify. I'm not going to do it. You know, I would rather put it on Bandcamp. Thank you, Scott, for putting that link up. I'd rather put it on a platform like Bandcamp and roll my dice with that than to completely get bent over with the Spotify crew. And as an independent artist, you're not a superstar. You're not signed. You don't have a label who's going to do all their machinations in order to push you. And you don't have claim to that 1 percentile range. The realization that the majority of people are that 99% that are paying for that 1%, is really starting to dawn on a lot of creatives, and they're refusing to put up their music on Spotify. And only superstars win on that platform. I think that's what's being very made very clear to us. And people kind of shrug their shoulders and say, "Yeah, well, that's always been true, but not like this, not to this level. Uh, this isn't a pyramid anymore. This is a needle." Only a microscopic percentage of artists generate the majority of streams, therefore generating the revenue and make the playlist placement and get the kind of algorithmic momentum going because they're again rewarding your attention. That works for Taylor Swift, that works for Drake, that works for these other artists. Doesn't work for anybody else really. you know Everybody else is there to fill in the blank spaces, to fill in the catalog, a placeholder. They don't need you to succeed, Spotify. They just need you to exist. And if you get to the point where you realize that and you say, hey, that's a game that I don't want to play, then eventually that snowball starts going and more people get caught up in it. And eventually, again, the momentum on a platform like Spotify begins to drop off. And your music, when you put it on Spotify, uh, helps keep the subscription feeling complete. In other words, if everybody else other than that top 1% was plugged into Spotify with their tracks, you would be listening to Beyonce, J. Cole, and Taylor Swift all the time. That would be it. And whoever BS, producers Spotify puts up themselves in order to pay themselves. And being a placeholder in that kind of ecosystem really is not a career model. It's not. You're just an inventory. And therefore, that's why artists are beginning to wake up to the fact that these streaming platforms, these utilities, if you will, are really not there to support, help, or even provide for you. It's quite the opposite. Artists need identity, they need context, they need stories, they need community, they need all these things in order to work and meaning. Also, scarcity as well. I can't describe the importance of scarcity. What do I mean by scarcity? Real simple. Again, I've touched on this. Is that back in the day, you read Rolling Stone or whatever that your artist was going to be releasing. As a matter of fact, they made a big deal about it in Rolling Stone. They would talk about all the artists that were releasing albums in that first quarter or first 6 months of the year. And you got to say, hey, May the 20th, may the force be with you, but also X, Y, and Z has a new album coming out. I'm going to be there. I'm going to be there. And that scarcity, that anticipation, that it's like Christmas. Oh, it's only a week to Christmas. Oh, it's 5 days to Christmas. It built up a connection between the fan and the artist, and that scarcity does not exist anymore. There is no scarcity in a streaming platform situation, even with movies. If I said to myself, boy, I haven't seen, Soul Plane in a long time. I'm joking. But back in the day, what did you have to do? You had to go down to your car, drive to the video store, see if the video you wanted was there, because sometimes, you go there and they be checked out, all the latest ones, all the hit movies. If it was a movie that was in the theater and just released on video, your chances of getting it that evening, unless you were early, are pretty slim. But again, that scarcity. Now I can watch Soul Play anytime I want to. I can go right on to any one of the streaming services that I have available to me, and I can download that movie and watch it just like that. I don't have to wait anymore. A lot of you guys are wondering, what the hell are you talking about, Soul Plane? Look it up. Soul Plane was probably the worst movie that was ever created in the history of mankind. And I saw it in Hawaii in a theater. I don't know why. I was bored. So me and my girl at that time, we decided to go to movies. And we were in Hawaii. And I sat there and I couldn't believe what I was watching. And had these two meth head biker guys sitting in front of us, and they were just whooping it up and having a good time because it was pretty bad. But again, even with that, I can get that movie now, minus the meth heads, biker meth heads, and watch it in the comfort of my home. And so, therefore, the scarcity is gone. And therefore, that takes out any meaning, that removes any meaning to that chain of events in order to get that product. Strips that all away. Streaming does. Every song, therefore, begins to look the same. Every movie begins to look the same. Every artist, you know, titles are identical, or at least along the same, whatever the flavor subject of the month is. And your work becomes just one little square in an infinite grid and makes you feel invisible, you know. It makes it again because aren't you didn't think to yourself, well, let me make this first 30 seconds interesting. um, and you're not getting the numbers, and therefore it makes you feel like you're not there, you're invisible, you're not memorable, you're measurable, but you're not memorable. Check here in the chat and see what's going on here. Spotify is evil and AI is hell. Hey, I know what you mean, Maddie. There are so many shorts on YouTube. They're pushing shorts so much. Everybody do shorts. Everybody do shorts. Now all these AI creators are coming up with these shorts, and now they're saying, screaming, "We got to get rid of these AI shorts. We got to get rid of these." It's like schizophrenic, man. It's just crazy. And you watch some of those AI videos on YouTube in the shorts. Some of them are good, but like I saw there was one that was obviously fake. It was a woman takes a selfie with some kind of wild animal, and then she gets eaten and then or chewed up, and then other content creators were talking about why would she do this, and I'm thinking to myself, dude, that's an AI video. You're commenting on an AI video. Wow. Brain just blew my mind. um Patrick says, I get to know a lot of new music through Spotify. That's the value of it for me. Yeah, again, um I really think, like, with the smartphone, you're only going to get so much out of the service. You're only going to get out of the service what you put into it. Some people are they're willing to scroll through and look for stuff or take the recommendations I'm sure they put up in order to listen to stuff, new stuff. However, most people are. They have a playlist. They'll add to that, infrequently, and that's pretty much well it. It's no different than when we were kids. We had a playlist when we were younger too. It was called a cassette tape. We put in our Walkman, And we made that playlist that was on that cassette tape. So that's not too much of a different thing. And when I was creating that, I wasn't looking for new music. New music found you in different ways back then. But again, it really depends upon the individual, in my opinion. Um, and Spotify, by the way, again, not only did they take this content and monetize it, uh, so that they could attract the major artists so that they could pay them more off the backs of everyone else. The owner of Spotify, I will say it again, said it 1,000 times, I'll say it 1,000 more. The original owner, when he sold out, when he cashed his chips in to the amount of somewhere in the neighborhood of $6 billion, some $4 billion, some ridiculous amount of money that he extracted. This is money that should have gone, that back in the old days would have gone to the artists without any question, and the record companies. And that's a different fight, but the splits were better. Um, he took that money and now he started an arms manufacturing company. He wanted to put that money and get involved in the arms race. So I jokingly say that, with Spotify, they'll play you the soundtrack that you can listen to while you're watching your neighborhood blow up. Excuse me. Yeah, that's a fact. That's a fact. Made by, being blown up by the bombs paid for by Spotify. And I can't get past that. I'm sorry. As a moral human being, I will have nothing to do with that. Now, not to say, this is questioning anybody's morality. I'm just saying from my viewpoint, that's evil. That's actually the word is insidious, and it's the truth. You can look it up online and see that that is the insidious truth of that. Taking the money from the artist, and artists are generally peace, love, and sunshine type folks. Anti-war, I would say. To take the money from the artist and to funnel it into the arms industry is, that's some, James Bond villain level type stuff. Now zoom out. Let's zoom out. This isn't just about Spotify, by the way. This is what's happening across the industry. Waves. I've talked about the company that shall not be named. I've been naming them a lot lately. Selling lifetime plugins, then pulling them behind subscription paywalls. Um, the thing that happened with Fender and the Persona Studio One. Native Instruments entering into liquidation proceedings. And artists locked into DAW's platforms and ecosystems they thought they owned, but it's becoming very obvious that they don't. Same pattern. Same pattern. Centralize, scale, lock in, extract, move on. We talked about this in the last live stream. It's the same system. It's the same thing. I'm trying to say this over and over again to reinforce this thought so that you guys can understand that this is the process. Centralize, scale, lock in, extract, move on. And this leaves the creatives, whether you're a filmmaker or a record producer, really left holding the bag. And streaming has perfected this art. That's why I said it works perfectly. It works the way it was intended to work. Again, it wasn't something that's intended to work for you as an artist, as creative. Maybe for the consumer to a certain extent. But even from that, it's extracting some parts of the process that are actually very important from the consumer as well. And, you know, with Jimmy talking about TikTok and Instagram not as replacements for streaming, but as relationship engines, I think is what he was trying to get, is that you can, those are platforms where you could actually somewhat build a relationship. You really can't build a relationship as an artist on Spotify. People can hear your music. Will that lead most people to dig a little deeper? Probably not. Probably not. I'm call me, the contrarian that I am, but I just truly believe that, contrary to, you know, the term smartphone, I don't think that most people utilize these devices in their optimal manner. It's laziness, you know. It's built-in laziness, and people take advantage of that. You don't discover, you know, on on Spotify, you can't speak directly, but with YouTube, with Instagram, and TikTok, you can. You show personality or not, or no personality. You can build context around a project. You can explain a project, and you can create the kind of emotional investment that you really need in order to grow your audience, and you become a person. And that's why you're seeing so many, artists from the 90s and from the 2000s, starting to come on YouTube and have talk shows and discussions and with other musicians from the same era, because they realize that the ways that they used to be able to create an emotional investment with their audience are no longer there. They have to go through this medium. And, you know, streaming platforms cannot do that. They just can't, because that's not how they're built. They're pipelines, they're not stages. The difference between a pipeline and a stage. Pipeline is a delivery system. A stage is a delivery system with an audience, I guess is the best way to put that. I don't doubt, or let me catch up here in the chat and see what's being said. I made a lot of playlists on cassette. Yeah, that was my thing. I I would, I had a dual cassette uh, player in one of the rooms in our house, and I would dub like songs, or I would tape songs off the radio. You would always get, you always have your cassette in there, and you're ready to hit record when your song came on the radio. You'd miss the first few seconds, but you basically get it, and that's how I did it. That was my playlist. I went on YouTube without being logged in, man. Every video in the auto feed was complete pile of garbage that I would never waste a moment of my life watching. Yeah, just do that sometime. Take yourself out and go into YouTube without being signed in and see, what that's like. Um, where is the income of YouTube going to? That's a great question, Patrick. Now, the guy who's running YouTube right now is a gentleman who is not new to the music industry at all. As a matter of fact, he and his son now um have been guiding the careers of most hip hop musicians since the days of Run DMC. And I know for a fact with him, and the way that he views things, is that he's always going to put the money into back into the industry, not necessarily in ways that are helpful again to the creatives, because it's not that kind of party. But he's not involving himself or letting YouTube get involved in the kind of shenanigans that's going on over at Spotify. Not all great stuff, but at the same time, nothing that 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 doesn't pass the smell test. He's a big advocate for getting more of the money into YouTube's hands. In other words, he wants to cut the rates that are being paid now. I think that has a lot to do with the ad revenue and the drop off that's occurred on YouTube for that. But in any case, that's as much as I know. Um, Run Riot, welcome, sir. Scott, it sucks for the unknown artist to create anything and get it out there. Must feel like your song was put on NASA's golden record. There's a reference for you. Only then to discover nobody will find your music on the giant streamers. Yeah, man. The golden record is what they put on the Voyager, the Voyager at Star Trek, the Voyager's craft, and just send it out into the universe. Yeah, that's kind of that's a great analogy, by the way. That's exactly what it feels like when you put your music on these streaming platforms. Um, Streaming is not going to disappear. It's just going to become background infrastructure, and then the center will shift, and artists will hopefully learn from that experience and try to find the venues that they can at least try to build a real ecosystem with their fans, have more control on their physical releases, and just use streaming as a reference point, not a foundation. I always use streaming, quite frankly, in my music as a reference point. So I can say, you can go there if you want to hear it. But it wasn't the foundation of what I was trying to build. Um, so the future is not really gearing up to be anti streaming, it's really gearing up to be post streaming dependent. In other words, finding ways, alternative methods uh, within this paradigm that we're in, this ecosystem that we're in, and make that work for you as an artist. And every time, here's the thing though, every time the music industry does these shifts, they always swear up and down every time that it's great for the artist. This time, trust us. We got you, boys. We got you, boys. Don't worry about it. And every time, control really gets moved further and further and further away from the people making the music. You know, and that's just the truth of it. You're losing. You're being herded down a certain direction as a consumer, as a creative, as a human being. It's not going to get better. My reading is correct. Things are not going to improve. They're not going to get better. And every one of these shifts, every time, is going to lead to issues. And there's very little um, that you can do about that if you play the streaming game. Again, you play stupid games, you win stupid prizes. If you back out and say, hey, that's not for me, I'm not going to play that game, then as an artist, you may have a chance. And that chance may grow as the audience for that type of work increases. Making your own CDs, albums, even cassettes. I'm hearing are being traded around. It's an amazing thing. And going that route. Because again, if you do streaming, it's just not going to work out for you. Now, I'm looking this up, Patrick. It's saying that YouTube really tries to give most of its money to its partners, cats like me, for example. However, that's again in the cards that they're trying to strip those payouts, that split. So that's as much as I could find, just casually looking that up, because that actually is a great question. I shall dive into that a little bit further. You know, for me, these discussions are things of interest to me. Obviously, I wouldn't talk about it. The things that are really interesting to me, history and mythology, I'm really getting into a lot. My library, I have a complete set of works of Josephus. I have Bullfinch's mythology, plus, encyclopedias and other books. And I use these media to do research, to look things up. I don't just take somebody at their word. So, with all of these podcasts that I do, I don't want you to take me at my word. I'm not expecting you to have a full set of Josephus works, but the works of Josephus. However, I do ask you to do your own research and to look into uh, how streaming in general has impacted your life in the last 10 years, changed cultures. And this cultural shift, once it occurs, will never come back again. I'll give you an example. Women, when they go to the beach these days, don't wear the the suits that they were wearing back in the 1920s. There was modesty issues and things that was coupled with that, but it went into string bikinis, or named after the atomic explosion at Bikini Island, designed after that, supposedly. The bikinis came out in the early 50s, and that cultural shift came. And if you were a girl and you went on the beach dressed, by 1970, dressed like your grandmother would have dressed back in the 20s, or even in that case, maybe even your mother, depending upon how old she had you, um, you would get laughed off the beach. That was a cultural shift that occurred. And once those cultural shifts occur in all kinds of things, we used to wash, you know, by hand, and then we had the little churning thing, and then we got the auto washer, and then we've got the washer dryer combo, and nobody's rushing down to the river unless they have to beat their clothes against rocks. We have these cultural shifts that happen, and innovations, and in just general society norms is the points of those two examples. And this shift that has occurred with streaming, that genie is never going to go back in the bottle. It's not. Um, what I think is going to occur is that, again, because a system like that needs scaling, and the scaling is not occurring, its importance and its dominance is going to drop off. And then the next thing will come up. And I just think in this case, it behooves you to, if you're a creative artist, to always be thinking of the alternatives. First of all, it will help you with your business growth, thinking independently, not taking the road less traveled. But I think from a connection standpoint that you need as a creative person, and this is regardless of it's music, film, whatever, is your painting. If you're Bob Ross, spirit of Bob Ross out there, painting, whatever. You have to start thinking about these things in these terms, and being aware of the cultural impacts that they naturally come bundled with. And I think that with you researching this and looking to it yourself, and doing those things, that will help you make your choices as a consumer, as a creative as well. You know, I always stress research and looking into things. Uh, the mind is a is a muscle. And just like all the rest of the muscles on your body, you need to exercise it. So please do that. Look into, see if what I've said tonight is not is true or not. And then, act accordingly or not at all. Maybe, again, I'm a contrarian, so I'm always going to take the opposite view of things. Or I'm going to try, regardless of what it is. Always going to look at the contrarian viewpoint. So please check me out. See if tonight it resonates with you. Dig a little deeper. I will hit the link here for the Jimmy Iovine, however else you want to pronounce his name, here in the chat. There we go. You can look at the original article yourself and read it. And yeah, I think that's it for tonight, guys. Thanks to Patrick. I'm kidding. I was up late last night and didn't get a whole lot of sleep. So I'm running on fumes right now. So I'm going to call it here. I want to say thank you so much for taking the time to tune in to this podcast tonight and listen to this. If you're interested in the music that I do, go over to my Bandcamp page. I am selling physical CDs of my music of my last album, Asanoki. Funny thing about watching that show last night, I was actually thinking about, well, if I were to do Asanoki live, this is how it's just wonderful thing watching live other people perform live, especially if you've been a performer in your life, because it gets those juices going. You want to be up on the stage again. So check that out if you guys can. That helps support this channel, really does. Uh, you may think to yourself, well, buying one CD, how's that going to help? I'll tell you what. You think you're supporting the artist on Spotify when you pay your monthly subscription, but as I pointed out, that 99 probably the artist that you're supporting is not getting the money. That's just a fact of it. That's just how the math works out. But in the case of something like Bandcamp, the money almost completely goes to the artist. And so that is a way that you can support artists or musicians that you like, not just me, but others that are on that platform. Um, Especially if streaming isn't your thing, those that give you the choice of getting a physical copy as well. Support artists like that because those are people who are really trying to reach out to you and have something important they want you to hear. So, with that said, you guys have a great evening or a great morning or afternoon, depending upon where you are and time of day. And I will say to you, thank you so much for showing up. Thank you guys. Thank you always for taking the time to listen to this podcast. And I will catch you on the next one this Sunday night, Sunday at Mike's, 11 p.m. Central European time. Be there, be square. See you guys. Bye bye.